Reading this book actually confirmed my suspicions, and it's all the girls in the book community are literally just Tumblr survivors in disguise. We just have rebranded. Welcome back, my gorgeous readers. I hope you had a great weekend full of fresh blooms and great warming reads in this beautiful weather. I definitely did. And today I want to talk about Cleopatra and Frankenstein, which is one of my most recent reads. And I have a lot to say about this book. So let's start. Starting with the basics, as always, Cleopatra and Frankenstein follows the story of Cleo, who is a 24-year-old British girl or British artist who is still trying to find her place in the sleepless city of New York. And just months after her student visa expires, she has a chance to meet Frank, who is 20 years a senior and also a self-made entrepreneur in the arts industry. And their connection is almost instant. Well, it's as instant as it is intense. And for some reason, they decide to rush into marriage after Frank promises Cleo happiness, well, a life of happiness, the freedom to paint, and also a green card. But unlike any fairy tale, as you would expect, they don't live happily ever after, and their marriage sets a chain of reactions within them and with everyone else around them, where basically their own lives are changed forever for the worse, I would say, at least for some of them. And as the story unfolds, we get the opportunity to meet the other characters around their lives. So, for example, we get to meet Frank's friends, we also meet Cleo's friends, and then we meet their families, or the lack thereof. There are a lot of characters in this story, but the ones that I would put the most emphasis in have to be Quentin, who is Cleo's best friend and who is someone who is a gay man who struggles with his own sexual and gender identity. We also meet Zoe, who is Frank's half sister and who is around a 20-year-old girl who basically is supported by Frank in her own lavish lifestyle. And after him marrying Cleo, Frank has to cut her off financially. Then we also meet Frank's best friends, who are Santiago and Andes. Santiago is a Peruvian chef who lives in New York, and then Andes is what I would say Frank's best friend, but also he is his partner in the arts company that they both share. And lastly, later in the book, we get to meet Eleanor, who is one of Frank's employees, who is or falls in love with Frank. In short, the story follows the intertwined lives of deeply flawed characters who are either chasing love, freedom, or validation, and they create this sort of web within the characters, which they each at the time become even more toxic and more harmful for each of the characters. I feel like I have to apologize in advance for what I'm about to say, but I unfortunately did not enjoy this book at all. And I know that this book is beloved by many in the book community, but I just think it's not as good as you guys think it is. And honestly, there are a lot of holes and voids in the book, not only in the plot, but also character-wise, that just makes this book not worth to read. I'm sorry. Starting with the characters, for example, I would say 90% of the characters in this book are absolutely insufferable, but not in a I'm making it a point to make them insufferable, but more in a I'm trying to make these characters so edgy and contrarian that they end up being dreadful kind of way, right? For example, I would say all the characters are so special, are so unique, they are so traumatized, they have so many issues that they refuse to take care of, or that they refuse to take accountability of, that they end up just creating all these issues that are not even related to the plot like at all. For example, the main example that I have over here written, and I actually made a point of writing it, is Quentin. Quentin is the biggest example of why did you create this character? Why did you give him this backstory? And why is it relatable to the plot? Or why is it important to the plot and the emotional arc whatsoever, right? For example, Quentin is mentioned, or Quentin quickly mentions that he is a Polish guy, a Polish gay man who moved to New York to just leave the city, right? Well, to leave the New York experience. And he apparently comes from money. So his family, or his grandma, I would say, is the one that pays him to be in New York to study abroad, right? But at the end of the day, what he does is just whatever, right? And apparently he hints that he is transgender, or that he feels some sort of gender dysphoria, but also at the same time he also feels like, I think he feels shame about his own sexuality as well, about him being gay, right? But rather than exploring those 2 points, right, or explaining or exploring the fact that he feels gender dysphoria, we literally just see the brief mentions and then instead sexualizes his dysphoria itself, right? Then as well, talking about his struggle with his own sexuality and the shame that he feels, or the guilt that he feels about feeling or being gay, we only see him shaming people back, right? We see how he shames all these girls for being vanilla and for judging him for his own sexual pleasure, or his own the way that he seeks sexual pleasure, which is just going to an orgy, right? Which I'm not judging if you want to go to these things, or if you enjoy these kind of things. At the end of the day, people are different, right? But why are you shaming people back when you feel the shame, or you feel that they are judging you, right? Like, there is no point. And then afterwards, after all these shaming and after all these, oh, I'm judging people for being so vanilla because they have judged me and my kinks back, then we see no mention of his struggle with sexuality or with his own shame and guilt, and obviously not at all about his own gender dysphoria, right? It's just like, literally, we're just sprinkling here like queer theory, and then we just forget about it. Worse still, we don't see any meaningful growth with the vast majority of the characters, right? The only character where I see a real growth is with Santiago, who is one of the friends of Frank and who goes through this weight loss journey and his own struggle with his binge eating disorder. That is the only growth that I see, or the only meaningful growth that I see, right? Because when I talk about the main characters, which are Frank and Cleo, right? With Cleo, for example, we see that her mental health was stable. She goes off meds, and then as she marries Frank, her mental health goes to shit, and then she goes back to the stable point where she was, right? But she has no meaningful growth. Like, she doesn't understand, or she doesn't make any she doesn't get any lessons about everything that happens with Frank, which at the end of the day was an extremely abusive relationship, right? We see absolutely nothing. She doesn't regret marrying him. She doesn't have any sort of revenge towards Frank. She literally just experienced her own thing, right? And like, obviously I understand that her mental struggles and like the way that she sees all the experiences that she has during her marriage could be based on, or could be because of this own depersonalization that I think that she feels at during the her dark times, I would say. But also, why don't you express it specifically about this, or like, why don't you mention that this is something that is happening to her, right? It's just like, oh, she's just there existing, right? And then after they divorce, she goes back into her meds, she moves countries, and then she's like, oh, actually, I'm now okay. Yeah, because you're getting medicated, and also because you have left an abusive relationship. That is why you're feeling okay, or that's why you are stable back again. But no, obviously, there is no lesson that we need to learn here. Same thing with Frank, because he is a functional alcoholic, right? First of all, we don't understand why he starts drinking in the first place, because all the myths that he has, those are like an excuse for him to drink. And also, he only stops drinking not because of Cleo, or not because he feels guilty about all the things that he has done to her, but because he wants to start a relationship with Eleanor, and he thinks that she won't like the fact that he is an alcoholic. That is the only reason why he stops drinking. And also, he doesn't regret doing all these things to Cleo or being extremely abusive towards her. The only thing that he regrets is the fact, it's all the embarrassing things that he did whilst drunk. That is why he stops drinking, because he doesn't see Cleo as a human being. He sees Cleo as an object, as something that he can cage in his own house, and he can just keep it as a literally as a prize, right? That is the main point why Frank marries her, because he sees this young attractive girl that is obsessed with him, and that she desires him, basically. And he believes that this is something that will make him look better, that will give him status, which at the end of the day, it does. But that's the thing. He doesn't see Cleo as a human being. And that is why he doesn't regret doing all these things. And he just regrets all the embarrassing things that he did during his own long alcoholic journeys. Another perfect example of a character that is deeply flawed to the point of them being dreadful, and also of having zero personal growth, is Zoe, Frank's half sister, because I feel like she just floats around New York having this idea of the life that she's meant to have, and she expects that everything is given to her, right? Just because she is attractive. That is the only reason why she's just doing absolutely nothing and just spending Frank's money and being bitter about Frank cutting her off, right? That is the only reason why she's upset and why she hates Cleo in the first place. And it just really infuriates me the way the disrespect that Zoe gets, right? Because it's not only the fact that she is deeply flawed and that I don't really like her as a character, but it's also the fact that she doesn't learn a lesson and she has zero personal growth again. But honestly, the biggest problem in this book are not even the characters, it's the plot itself. And I feel horrible by saying these things, because at the end of the day, I always want to give books a chance, especially if it's a debut novel, right? But I would say that the plot itself is meaningless. It just makes no sense, right? And I think it's because the characters don't evolve, and therefore at the end of the story we just find ourselves in the same point, or in the same situation, right? And one of the things that I enjoy, actually, and I will say this myself, is the multiple POV storytelling, or sort of plot storytelling, right? Where we see the different versions of the plot, or the different versions of the story, depending on which character we are following, right? And that is something that I enjoyed from the book, and I think it was actually quite well done. But one of the things that I still see is the fact that there are many points of the stories, or many POVs, that make absolutely no sense to the story and are just there just to be refilled, or just to make the book look even bigger. Because tell me why we are reading about Quentin's life story, or Quentin's struggle with his sexuality and his gender, when it's not even it doesn't even make sense in the story, because this is not something that directly affects Cleo, Frank, or any of them, right? Or for example, the fact that Zoe it becomes a sugar baby as well, that is something that doesn't really make sense. I understand why it happens, and I understand it's because Frank cuts her off financially, but it just doesn't make sense. Why would you want to put it in the story, right? And then lastly, Santiago's arc. First of all, I loved that part. I thought it was great, and honestly, I would have enjoyed the book way more if it was just about Santiago, because I think there is a lot more source that we could take out of here, or out of the story, or Santiago's story. But it just doesn't make sense in the book. Why are you talking about Santiago's love story if you're talking about Cleo and Frank? I don't understand why. And getting back again into Quentin's story, or Quentin's arc, because I am so raged about this. What's the point of Quentin's addiction arc? Why do we need to know that he's an addict? Or why do we need to know that he is like just shooting heroin over there anywhere all at once, right? And that you have lost contact, or that Cleo has lost contact with Quentin. It just, like, there is no point of having this story just over here in the book, right? Is it because you're trying to show that Cleo is actually alone in this world, or in New York City, and therefore she is isolated with Frank, who is abusive towards her? Maybe, but also, why do you completely forget that Audrey, one of the first characters that we meet with along with Cleo, exists? Like, I think the author completely forgets that Audrey exists, right? It's just like this one character that is making just one function and then just completely disappears, right? Like, they were actually very close. They were like mates. They lived together. And you're telling me that she completely forgets about her. Like, a flatmate, completely forgets about Cleo, one of her best friends. It just doesn't make sense. Why are you putting an addiction redemption arc and then forget that Cleo has other friends? It's just, there are too many dangling threads around here, and it just makes the story incomplete, and it just makes it feel unfinished. I honestly feel like a villain by tearing this book apart so hard, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves, why did this book, which in my opinion is very pretentious, get so much praise in the first place, right? And I think it just comes down to two things, and it's that the characters are just straight up forming these sort of liberalist ideas that people love to talk about, right? Or that people are obsessed with at the moment, which is sex work, which is gender identity and sexual identity, and also contrarianism in general, right? But also as well, I think it brings this sort of millennial sadness and desperation of having these horrible lives that people really seem to enjoy. And that is something that I see in not only in contemporary literature, but that I see in like in our society in general, more specifically in social media and more in TikTok. It's just so clear to me that this book is just peak millennial expression, right? The first thing that gave it away was the dialogue between Eleanor and Frank, where they express their feelings towards each other. And it's literally just them going like, sauce for this, sauce for that, sauce that Cleo left, sauce that your father died. That is such a millennial expression, right? And then the second thing that gave it away for me was the fact that all the characters are so unique, so special, and so damaged at the same time that it just creates a hollow shell of mental illnesses and disorders, or like literally it's a shell of a DSM-5 book inside, and just makes it like, it just doesn't make it relatable for real people in general. And these two reasons are why I think this book is very Tumblr 2013 Tumblr coded, right? If this came out in 2013, this would be as famous as the Bible. I can tell you that, because it's just so clear to me. Like, I just see all the characters and I see how they fit into the Tumblr categories, right? We see, for example, Cleo, she is peak manic pixie dream girl. Like, if there was a dictionary that had manic pixie dream girl in one of the quotes and we saw a picture, it would be Cleo. Absolutely. We see how she's an artist, how she is extremely attractive. She has this sort of fairy witchy type of vibe, right, where everyone is just enamored with her and everyone wants to be around her. But then she has her own mental issues and she has like this these sort of daddy issues that she doesn't really understand or she doesn't really resolve, and that is why she is attracted towards dysfunctional fatherly figures like Anders or like Frank, for example. Another super clear example that I see of this like Tumblrification is Quentin. And he is the worst, or like he reeks as the worst combination of Tumblr, which is the like extremely queer community with the sort of I have mental disorders like competition type of Tumblr, and also the I am romanticizing drugs, sex, and any sort of self-harm and abuse, right? If Quentin was in Tumblr, or if Quentin existed for real and he was in Tumblr in 2013, he would be like, do you remember those sort of videos that were like super popular on Tumblr and would get like thousands and thousands of notes, where there would be like this sort of person or like this sort of guy just straight up listening to Lana Del Rey whilst they were doing lines or they were smoking pot, and then they would be like passionately kissing someone else. That is exactly what Quentin would be. Like, he is the worst combination of the three, right? He is in the queer community where he needs to show how different and how unique and how bad his life is, or like how bad his life as a gay man is, and also seems to be all the pronouns, all the gender identities, and all the sexualities as well. And then he has all the mental disorders, everything that everyone has. And then also at the same time, he loves taking pictures of all the drugs that he takes, or that he, the fact that he needs to take drugs because of all these issues that he has. That is exactly Quentin. And last but not least, Zoe doesn't escape the Tumblr filter either. She is the perfect example of someone on Tumblr whitewashing sex work. And that is exactly what she's doing, right? She just creates a sugar baby page and just starts meeting this random guy that pays for her company and pays for her time. And honestly, I think it's quite pretentious to say that all sugar babies are not having sex, or that Zoe's experience as a sugar baby is the perfect example of sugar babies or being a sex worker in general, because that's not how it is. That is not the reality, right? That is just whitewashing sex work. And that is exactly what Zoe would be doing in Tumblr in 2013. She would be like very proudly saying that she's a sex worker, or that she's a sugar baby, and just explaining her life and just getting like thousands of notes and hearts, and just thousands of questions, and just validating her own narcissism and her own need for validation, and just show how like great her life is as a sugar baby, and just promoting sex work in general. That is exactly what Zoe would be, and that is exactly what Zoe does in the book, basically. In my humble opinion, at the end of the day, I think this book doesn't deliver as you guys think it does. In fact, I would say that this book doesn't challenge the toxic patterns that we see in the story, right? Rather, I would say it romanticizes them, because we see how all these toxic patterns that we see, sex work, domestic violence, drug abuse, and mental health issues, we see them just all combined and combobulated into this sort of static vibe that is millennial nostalgia and very Tumblr-esque, right? So at the end of the day, what I would say is that this book uses all these patterns as aesthetic traits rather than actual lived struggles. Like, I think it's quite pretentious to take all these patterns or all these struggles and just bring them into a book and just try to make it work and try to make it sad millennial Tumblr vibes. I think it's very pretentious. And that is all for today, my amazing readers. Thank you so much for staying until the end. If you have any other interpretations of the book, I would love to hear them about them. So just make sure that you comment down below what you thought of this book, or if you think that I have missed anything that I haven't mentioned in the video yet. And also make sure that you like and subscribe. And you can also follow me on my social media as well if you want. I post way more content over there. And until next time, I hope that your coffee cup stays warm, that your bookshelf stays filled with books, and that all the stories that you read always hit the spot. Stay reading even during the darkest hour. Bye.